what better to do on a gloomy, rainy day than get underneath the new 525 and give it a full inspection. So we haven't really done much with this car since I got it. My 1991 525i E34 with only 80,000 miles. So with 80,000 miles, you'd think probably doesn't need much. It's probably pretty well sorted, but that is the opposite of what is probably going to be the reality with this car. At 80,000 miles and 30 years old, most things probably haven't been addressed. Most things probably need to be addressed, and it's probably in just as poor mechanical drivetrain shape as a car with 350,000 miles, just because 30 years is not kind to control arms, bushing, seals, rubber, all that stuff. So as the weather gets nicer here and we start to kind of want to drive this thing more, I want to make sure that it's in decent mechanical health before we start driving it, and I want to make a list of everything I'm going to have to do to this car, everything that we're going to do together on the channel. So let's get in the garage, jack this thing up, and we're going to start out in the engine bay. We're going to look around everything, see what leaks, see what needs to be addressed, check out the suspension components, check out the rear suspension components, driveline components, and just pretty much make a nice little list of everything that this car is going to need. My guess is it'll probably need a lot, but who knows. Right now, with the little bit of driving it's had in it, it probably might be alright, but similar to the 633, if you guys watch that series, as I start driving this, I think more things will kind of pop up, more leaks will become apparent, because once you start driving these cars that haven't been driven much their whole life, that's when the leaks occur. So I think I'm going to avoid getting to that point and just kind of hammer out everything from the beginning, and then we'll kind of go through and discuss what's worth doing now, what's worth waiting, what's not worth doing at all. So let's get in here and let's get started. The area that will tell us pretty much the least, and that is from the top of the engine bay. So we're going to look in and kind of identify the things that we can sort that are from the top of the engine bay. Underneath will tell us more, but just as a start here, so looking around, valve cover gasket certainly needs to be addressed. We got leaky valve cover gasket down in the bottom corner, which is where it will always leak because of gravity. So valve cover gasket's leaking. Other than that, in the rear, it appears to be leaking in the back as well. Washer fluid's good. Battery, as I've said to you guys, is in the engine bay on this car because it's an early model 90s build date, so ugly battery in the engine bay, which is ugly. Other than that, there's nothing else on this side that's important at all. Thermostat housing's crusty. The hoses are a little bit crusty. Clutch fan is definitely crusty. So my guess would be that these are all original, never been replaced. We don't know, but we're gonna have to assume that water pump and thermostat are gonna need to be replaced. That's just something that you should do regardless of if the car's having issues or not. This car isn't having issues, but I'm not gonna drive this car comfortably on an unknown water pump or thermostat. That's the first thing that'll fail. Radiator looks perfectly fine. I would almost say this radiator has been replaced, but it could just be an 80,000 mile radiator. It looks like super nice. Even the expansion tank isn't like yellowing. So I would probably bank that this radiator has been replaced. It appears to be an OEM unit. It looks perfectly fine. Even an older radiator, I'll never really go out of my way to replace them. I have about 5-6 spares, so not something I'm gonna go out and buy OEM. I have a brand new fan clutch waiting to go on, so that's easy. Aside from that, I'm gonna come over to that side and we're gonna look at that side now. All right, this side will tell us a lot more. There's a lot more to see on this side. So starting up at the front, kind of peeking under the manifold, fuel lines look actually good. No cracking, but probably something that'll be redone. No leaks from the cam sensor. Coolant temp sensors look all right. Now down in here under the ICV, or in the ICV area, the ICV curled hose actually looks pretty good. The clip is intact. All the ICV lines from this point look decent, but those are things that are really cheap and worthwhile just replacing while you're in there, especially if the manifold comes off. I'm sure I will take the manifold off on this car and do manifold gaskets. That's probably a good thing to do. Again, the car probably doesn't really need it, but you might as well. These are cheap, kind of easy things to do, and if the manifold comes off, you might as well do them. Coming back over here, the throttle body linkages need to be cleaned, but otherwise they look fine. The intake boot has some cracks in it, so intake boot will be getting replaced. Minor, but still. And the thing I figured would be bad, and is bad on literally every single one of these cars, the ICV hose that comes from the bottom of the ICV up into the bottom of the throttle, or the intake boot, is cracked. I'll put a clip of that. Those are always cracked on these, so that's a decent source of a vacuum leak right there. So the car wasn't really having any issues, but certainly that would attribute to any inconsistencies in the idle that we have seen. So that will get addressed. Other than that, air box, air filter will be done. Math looks good. This is kind of weird. The brake fluid reservoir has the cap, and then it has the, I don't even know what this is. I believe it's missing a cover though. So I think we need a cover for that. The brake booster vacuum hose looks good. It's got the vacuum block off nipple. It's got a vacuum cap on that little nipple that always cracks off with a little plastic thing. So that's good. We got our automatic trans fluid dipstick, I think. So let's see, what do we got for automatic trans fluid in here? High, low. As I said in the first drive video, this auto drives like butter, shifts like butter. So I think we're probably fine here, but want to double check. Will I do an auto trans service? No. Why is this dipstick so hard to get out? Well, I don't know. I think there's instructions to reading that, because as of right now, it's severely, I mean, it's completely full on the dipstick, and I don't think it's supposed to be. But I think you're supposed to read auto transes when they're warm. So that probably explains that. Anyway, like I said about the engine oil, overfilled is better than underfilled. We've already checked the engine oil in the last video. It's overfilled. We're doing an oil change. And then from there, brake fluid flush, probably do brake lines, but we'll see when we get underneath. All these upper coolant hoses look fine. Those are something that I never will really bother doing. Our steering, the reservoir's seeping, but I don't know if that's overfilling or if that's, or what that is, but let's check the fluid level. Fluid level's good. The fluid could probably be replaced. Interesting, this car says CHF 7.1. So this car takes hydraulic fluid. Every other, or I guess most other M50 cars I have, the power steering will take ATF. So I'm not sure about that, but I don't think this reservoir would have been replaced. So I guess this is a CHF unit. So when we get there, we'll get there. Otherwise, from the top, like I said, not much to see here. Nothing really wrong. So the things I pointed out we'll address. But now let's jack this car up and let's get underneath, and that's what we'll really learn a lot about this engine. We've got the front end up in the air on jack stands. Before we take the wheels off, not really much play. I would say no play in the front suspension, just by feel. The little bit of movement is usually just the actual steering box moving. So this feels pretty good, but we're gonna take the wheel off, and we're gonna get in here and check this side out, and both sides will probably be the same. Then we'll get under there and check the engine bay, but let's see what the front suspension looks like first. I mentioned in the first drive video, the tires. So the rear tires, as I said, original. We'll go check the dates when we get back there. But the fronts, they are, let's see if I can find it. I believe this is the number, and it says 379 and then triangle. Unless the triangle is supposed to mean 0, and these were made in 1990, which would make sense, and that would mean these are the original tires. But anyway, as I stated, the only thing I know maintenance-wise on this car is that it has brand new front shocks. The car drives fantastic. So the front shocks are brand new. The rotors, no lip, they feel fine. Pads, tons of life left. So the brakes I'll probably leave, unless as I drive I find that they feel really warped, but I don't think that'll be the case. Brake line, definitely original, doesn't look too bad, but it's probably a good idea to replace it anyway. So we might be doing brake lines all around on this car. Yeah, it doesn't look horrible. From the back, sway bar end links. They actually look decent. They don't have a lot of play in them. End links, I would say, are good. Front lower control arm, ball joint is shot. You can see there, it's leaking, it's ripped. So when that's bad, this doesn't even matter because the whole arm has to be replaced. So it looks like we'll probably be doing lowers on this car. Uppers, I can't move them by hand. They actually look pretty good. The ball joint is over here. That appears to be leaking as well. Yeah, I don't know, there's a lot of like, it seems like fluidy. I think all these ball joints are kind of leaking out because there's no brake fluid. The brake caliper's fine, the line's fine, but you can see all the kind of residue right there. So that ball joint it's still fairly tight, but it's leaking, so that'll probably have to be done. These arms are probably original. I can try to find the date really quick. Let me see. Yeah, the date says 90 on them, and if it focuses with one hand, you probably can't see. I think I need two. There's a little bit of play by hand. You don't want that. So we'll probably be doing uppers and lower control arms on this thing. Tie rods actually look good. The ball joints on both sides are fine. They're pretty firm. I can't move them by hand. Crusty, but they actually look pretty good. And that would mean that the end link or the stabilizer is pretty good. This appears fine. That's the pitman arm right there. That's the pitman arm to the steering box. You probably can't see on camera, but the front lower control arm, like I said, that ball joint, we got movement there. We got a little bit of movement from the upper. And then no movement from the tie rod, but that pitman arm does have a little bit of movement. I think it's just twisting motion, like the car's actually steering. I don't think it's that worn, but usually that's, I think, a pretty cheap part and worthwhile replacing. So that'll be one of those things we'll probably wait on, but eventually we'll probably do the entire stabilizer bar in the middle, pitman arm, and then maybe the tie rods too. That I'm kind of in between on that. I did those on my Calypso at 250K. Those last a long time, and if the steering feels good, then the steering's probably good. So those we probably won't mess with. You can see driver's side as well. Lower control arm ball joint is absolutely shot. This one looks a little bit worse than the passenger side. Otherwise, brake is not seized up on this side, so that's all good. And then all the control arms, end links and stuff are all in the same condition. So now the fun part, and instantly alarming, the AC compressor has a lot of green fluid underneath it. So that's Freon right there leaking, and a little bit of oil as well. So that is something that I won't be able to figure out because I don't do AC stuff, and tracking down AC leaks is usually a huge pain. I have yet to know if the AC in this car even works. I haven't tried it, so we'll see. If it works, we'll probably just top it off, clean up the leaks, and then kind of follow up from there. Who knows? This is 30 years of maybe leaking refrigerant, so I don't want to instantly condemn it, but the clutch is spinning free, so the compressor's not locked up, so that's good. So I have a feeling this will work. It doesn't even look original. This looks like it might have been replaced, so who knows. Oil pan, front bottom corner, as always, a little seepy, so not bad, nothing dripping. And who's to say that's not coming from the valve cover? Because if you look up there, you can see the valve cover has been leaking down to the chain tensioner. Tensioner might be leaking. So it's always kind of up in the air. The front timing cover on these is usually pretty oily, and most of the time it actually is from the valve cover. The back of this pan is super dry, so I will not do the oil pan on this thing anytime soon because that's just not a fun job, and if it's not pissing like my 6 Series, I'm not going to bother. I'm going to clean this up, do the valve cover gasket, and then we'll monitor from there. Could be the timing cover. That's another thing that I will not be doing on this motor. I'm not taking off all this front stuff for a timing cover. If it's a super slight leak like this, then it is what it is. If it develops into something worse, then we'll tackle it, but not something that we'll address right off the rip. Belts have been replaced, or they're just mint from factory, but I would say replaced because there's no signs of no cracking at all, and after 30 years they would definitely be cracked. The engine strap ground is actually in perfect condition. Usually those are really frayed, so that looks good. So another area of instant concern, the driver's side frame rail is dripping. which this is power steering fluid. I've already done the smell test. That's the only thing that would really leak from there. So that's coming down from the reservoir, I believe. I'm gonna have to pull out the air box and further look into that. But I guess we can assume that we're gonna need a power steering line or two from that reservoir for sure, or at least hose clamps tightened. Usually you can actually get away with just tightening down the hose clamps and it'll kind of take care of that. So power steering might need to be addressed. And now looking up here, that's the power steering pump. No leaks from the pump, which is nice. So the power steering box and all the lines associated with the box up there, no leaks. That's nice. That's a rare thing. Oil filter housing, no leaks. That's also another surprising thing right there. That is probably something that'll begin to leak. And if we ever take the manifold off for like O-rings and all the manifold stuff, that will be something we'll do while we got the manifold off. But until that develops leaks, we won't do that. So you can see there's no leaking down the pan here, down the side of this block. If the oil filter housing gasket was leaking, this would be all oily. I had that on my Calypso. Level sensor, no leak. That's really nice. Pan, like I said, is dry. The rear main is actually pretty, from this point, right now it looks dry. There's nothing leaking through the bell housing of the transmission. When we do the manual swap, if we do the manual swap, and we'll get that in another video, that's when we will adjust the rear main seal, of course. Here you see the automatic transmission looks ungodly, disgusting, leaking from the linkage right there. As always, the pan is a little bit leaky. You can see all the way around, leaky pan. The exhaust is a little raggedy. You can see the heat shielding there is kind of rusting off. The cats look good. The rear muffler or the rear resonator looks decent. We'll get back over there in a little bit. So exhaust system, have no intentions of modifying. If it has leaks, I'll fix them, but that's another thing. Let's jack up the rear end. Let's get under the rear and see what the rear needs. See the Gibo, whatever, has some cracking. Actually doesn't look too bad at all. We can't see the CSB because the exhaust and the heat shield are in the way, so we don't know the CSB condition. The Gibo doesn't look too bad. That is something that would come with replacement with the manual. I'm not going to do a replacement on the auto trans, so if the time comes for the manual swap, then we will obviously do that, and a CSB and all the drive shaft stuff. But for now, that's not in any condition, that's not drivable. Amazingly, this car has both the rear exhaust brackets intact. This one's cracking a little bit. Might have to replace that one, but otherwise both are intact. And I think that's even, this is the OEM emergency in case that breaks. The exhaust will sit on that little bracket so it doesn't kind of hang too badly, which is actually pretty crazy. I've never seen that intact on one of these cars. I'm pretty sure all four of these are actually the original tires. They're super dry rotted. They still have the same 289 triangle stamp. If you guys know more about that, let me know. But I'm thinking the 9 triangle means 90. 1990, the car was a 91. I mean, to me that only makes sense. But if you guys know more about that, let me know. These are the old school Pirelli P600s with that goofy tread on them, so definitely look old. Rear brake, tiny lip, pads, tons of life left. Again, brakes all around. That's something that we'll do way later down the road. Brakes are the one thing with age, as long as they don't, rust, which these actually look like crap. So actually, if I do these brakes, it'll be because I want them to look nicer, not because it needs them. But again, if the car's not sitting in like a frickin' wooded, swampland and the brakes get rusted, brakes are not going to go bad from sitting. They're not a wear component like a rubber or a gasket or whatever. These rear shocks appear to be original. Don't think these have been replaced. None of the components look fresh or new. Top hats, bump stops are cracked. Don't look great. Axle boots are actually clean, no rips. Fuel filter, ooh. Fuel filter might be leaking. No, fuel filter's not leaking, but Lord have mercy. The lines that are going to it look super old, so we'll be doing those fuel lines. And a fuel filter, of course, this, as far as I'm concerned, looks to be the original fuel filter. Rear brake lines actually don't look bad at all. Those will be one thing that we'll get to when we do the brakes, probably. Diff is not an LSD. Didn't think it would be. Rear subframe bushing, something that we'll be doing. It's kind of hard to tell if they're good or not. The jack is on the chassis, not the subframe. It looks like some decent spacing there. My guess is that they're bad. Those go bad just sitting, those, you know, rubber. So those will be replaced. I actually have brand new power flexes ready to go in. So that's what I'll be doing, those because I already have them. The dog bones are shot. No surprise there. Let's see how badly they are. Well, they don't move by hand, but I mean, it's easy to see they're destroyed. So dog bones and rear subframe bushings for sure. Diff bushings actually look fine. These rear diff bushings are kind of a, if you drop the subframe sort of thing for me. Same with the R-tabs. So this is where what I might say might be a little bit controversial, right? I talked about this before and I'm a firm believer of this. These cars are a lot different than E36, E46, even E30, excuse me. These cars, my Calypso, as far as I'm concerned, has 200,000 miles on the rear trailing arm bushing. It's not like the R-tabs in this car where they have that stupid pocket design right there and they go horrible and the car will drive miserable. My car puts down 420 wheel on maybe even original R-tabs. You will not feel the difference. That's not to say you shouldn't do them, right? But at 80K and the stress and the struggle to get these R-tabs replaced, I'm not doing that. I'm not even gonna think about it. They literally don't look bad at all. I don't see any cracking, and that's just not something I'm interested in doing right now. If I drive the car and it doesn't feel good, but on the first drive with bad dog bones and probably bad subframe, car felt fine. R-tabs on a stock power M50 car, it's just not something I'm interested in doing. I know a lot of you guys like to make your lives harder, and that's just not something I want to do because if you looked it up, you know R-tabs are not fun on this car. It's very hard to do it. It's easy to bend the actual entire trailing arm. It's not a very user-friendly thing to replace. So those will be staying. They look fine. Diff bushings, front, rear. Again, another thing, rarely will you notice go bad. My Calypso car was putting down good power with those. I did put in a poly front one, stock rears. That car has no issues. There's no diff clunk. There's no rear end clunk from this car. It's a freaking auto. When we do a manual swap, we may, since we'll probably put a new diff in it, we'll probably do diff bushings and drop the whole rear subframe, and that's when we'll debate if we want to do R-tabs and stuff. But this car is not being built to put down power, and because of that, I don't know if I want to basically endure the thought of dropping the entire subframe. We'll see come this summer. I might be bored. I might be wanting to, but as of right now, I don't think we're going to be doing diff bushings or R-tabs. Those are not something that is easy, and I don't feel like kind of dropping a diff to do it and dropping a subframe to do it, because realistically, you're not going to be able to do those diff bushings without dropping the subframe, because you're going to need some sort of press to get them out. And even if you do poly to put them in, then you could put those in by hand. But if you're putting in OEM ones, you need a press to get them in. And I'm not sure if they make those special tools to do it with the subframe in the car. Dropping the subframe is very easy on this car. That's not really the thing, but it's just I don't think I'm gonna have the time and the resources to kind of want to take care of that. But we'll see. There's the front diff bushing for you. Looks pretty good. No cracking. It's kind of hard to see on camera. Like, no BS. There's actually no cracking in that. So I've had cars with a little bit of cracking and they're still fine. So that is not something that needs to be addressed right now. The drive shaft, like I said, you can't see the CSB. The output flanges on the diff are actually a little bit leaky. That's kind of weird. I've rarely had E34 diffs that will actually leak like that. Usually they're pretty good about not leaking, and if they do leak, they leak from the cover, not from the rear. I'm not even sure what you replaced to stop that from leaking, to be honest. But like I said, manual swap means new diff, so not something that needs to be addressed right now. Fluids, diff fluid, we'll probably rock this diff fluid, only 80,000 miles. I don't know. Rear muffler, absolutely crusty. I think this car has some exhaust leaks, but we're not going to really address that until, like I said, manual swap, which would mean exhaust would come out, and then we can work on getting a new one. So, aside from that, underneath here, car's not bad. Rear sway bar bushings need to be replaced, but will we do them? We'll see. And then the last thing that leaves us with on this car is the fuel pump assembly. Fuel pump, if I'm taking this on a road trip, will be replaced, even though it's good. Fuel door hinge, I got that on the way right now. That's obviously bad. So there we pretty much have it, a full inspection of the new 525. Everything that needs to be addressed, it will be addressed. Aside from what we looked at, blower motor resistor, very important. definitely get into those before anything else pretty much. Like I said, fuel pump will probably get done. Other than that, interior stuff doesn't really need anything interior wise, except for the head, what's it called? The sunroof motor cover. But we got a little surprise coming for this car. We'll get into it in another video, so don't worry about that. PDR will be getting done sometime in the future whenever I decide to kind of sack up and spend the money on that. PDR is one of those things that's very hard for me to spend money on because it's pretty expensive and it's easy for me to just be like, all right, I'll live with these dents or whatever, but I want this car to be perfect, so we'll get to that. Tires, wheels, suspension will all be aftermarket replaced, so I'm not worried about that stuff. And then pretty much, like I said, the bulk of things from the trans back are pretty much dependent on if and when we do that manual swap. I'm not gonna keep saying if because I'm gonna get into that in a different video, but for now, when we get to that manual swap, which will be in the near future, everything from the trans back will be replaced. All the bushings, all the seals, trans mounts, which is actually the one thing I forgot to look at just now. For some reason I didn't see those. I'll probably check on those. Those are probably fine. But so anyway, yeah, that would mean new trans with all trans seals, clutch, all that stuff. Shifter linkages, all new. Diff will be totally replaced, so the leaky diff won't matter. Drive shaft components will be replaced, the Guibo CSB. And then at the time I drop the diff, I think we'll probably just do the whole subframe at that point. Subframe bushings I can do with the subframe in the car. It's actually easier to do it that way. There's a little technique I'll show you guys. I haven't done subframe bushings on one of these cars in 3 years, so I'm excited to kind of do that. Not really because it sucks, but I got a nice little trick I think you guys will enjoy. A little bit of suspension here and there, front and rear, a couple things, a couple leaks to fix on the motor, but otherwise, this car is in pretty good mechanical shape. As I drive it more, like I said, I think we'll see more leaks develop. We're not gonna go ahead and pull the whole engine out and bulletproof it. This is gonna be more so kind of as I enjoy it because this is a personal car, not a car that I'm flipping or not a car that I'm looking to kind of restore. It doesn't need restoration. It's pretty good as it is. So that's why a lot of this stuff I'm kind of put into the, we'll see when we get to it side. I think that's another thing. A lot of people are really worried about owning these cars, and for me it's hard just because I've had so many and I just know the limits of a lot of these components. I know when something needs to be addressed and I know when something can kind of chill. And it may be kind of hard for you guys to understand watching. You may think I'm kind of an idiot for saying, oh, I'm not gonna address this or that. But when it comes down to it, these cars are not very picky. An E36 with like minor F-cab issues throws the car off. Minor R-tab issues throws the whole car off. This thing with an auto trans, it's slow, it's not making power, it's not gonna be making power anytime soon. It doesn't need all this stuff bulletproof. The motor is better suited to just stay as it is. Some of the seals just aren't worth, that's just the one thing, as you work on these cars more and more, you'll start to realize some things are just not worth replacing at the time because you will, I mean, to do a front timing cover gasket on this car, I mean, you'll be spending 8 hours in here and it's just not worth it for a little bit of a seepage. It's not a freaking concourse car. It doesn't need to be totally leak free. If it's not dripping on the ground, it does not have to be urgently addressed. That's the way I kind of work on my cars. I'm sorry it's not the M539 way, but he has more resources than I do. He has more time than I do. He has a lift and this and that. So some of this stuff is just not worth it to me to do. This car will be perfectly drivable and can cross the country with a few minor things addressed. It doesn't have to be perfect, pristine, every gasket. So as leaks pop up, which I kind of think some will, then we'll get into things. But otherwise, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, kind of going over what an 80,000 mile car will look like from the top down. Again, kind of a misconception to think the car is in perfect mechanical shape because there's low miles. Not the case. You can see this car has its fair share of leaks and blown bushings and all that. So all the cars will need it. They're old. So as the months go on and the weeks go on, a lot more videos to come. Obviously, we're going to dive into all this. The E36 is pretty much done at this point. So now we have a lot to work on with this car. We'll kind of go as we go. I got school wrapping up here in 6 weeks, and then I'll have all the time in the world to dedicate to this. So right now, I'm taking things slow. Weather's garbage. The E36 is done, so I'm kind of enjoying it. But we'll get into this car a lot more in the future here. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.